December 14, 2025, Buddhadhamma, page 819, chapter 8.2, Liberation of the Mind and Liberation by Wisdom. Now, it's good to note that the difference between Sito Vimutti and Panya Vimutta, which are states of minds, and Upabhaga Vimutta and Panya Vimutta, who are individuals. So Upabhaga Vimutta is a good example is Venerable Maha Moggallana, and Apanya Vimutta is Venerable Sariputra. But their states are considered Sito Vimutti, which is Maha Moggallana, and the states of mind is Panya Vimutti, is Venerable Sariputra. Earlier, the liberation, the vimutti, was mentioned as the synonym for nibbida. Also discussed in the section of the attributes of awakened beings. Here, we examine the term vimutti more closely. In the commentaries, the term vimutti, in the highest sense, has three distinctive definitions. First, vimutti as the path, magga, the act of liberation, the existing conditions at the moment of liberation. Second, vimutti as the fruitation, bala, the freedom resulting from liberation, the results of being a liberated person. And third, vimutti as equivalent to nibbida, the state of a liberated person, the nature of freedom reached and experienced by liberation, a liberated person, providing such blessing and happiness, ease, contentment, and peace. The liberation unawakened people determine as an object of contemplation and set as a goal. Of these three definitions, the second one is vimutti, as fruitation is the most specific and pertains to the essential meanings of liberation. It refers here most often to the fruitation of arihatship. When one abandons all 10 fetters, samyojana, is released from mental taints, released from all their asavas. In the definition of vimutti as the path, there are additional agents, especially true knowledge, vijja, dispassion, viraga, which are often paired with liberation. In such cases, vijja and viraga are paths, while vimutti constitute as bala, the fruit. In the third definition, vimutti is the synonym for nibbida. Vimutti as fruitation, especially as the fruit of arihatship, is divided into two kinds, sito vimutti and panya vimutti. Sito vimutti is translated as liberation of the mind. It is the liberation made possible to the strength of concentration. It is the state of a concentrated mind which quells passion and is free from the bonds of kilesas and asavas. Panya vimutti is translated as liberation through panya, wisdom. Can equally be translated as liberation by wisdom. Since it refers to wisdom of an arihat and is purified and perfected, this wisdom dispels ignorance and frees a person from defilements, kilesas, and asavas. Now, these explanations according with the commentary definitions, vimutti as path and fruit, vimutti as fruit and nibbida, and vimutti as arahanta bala. Vimutti paired with knowledge or vijja, or supreme knowledge. Now, liberation of the mind is achieved by abandoning lust. Liberation by wisdom is achieved by abandoning ignorance. Let me say that again. Liberation of mind is achieved by abandoning lust. Liberation by wisdom is achieved by abandoning ignorance. The commentaries define sito vimutti as concentration, which is the fruit of arihatship. They define Panya Vimutti as wisdom and knowledge, which is the fruit of Arihatship. All persons who have attained Arihatship have completed these two kinds of liberation. In passages referring to the attainment of Arihatship, these two terms therefore always exist as a pair. With the destruction of asavas, the taints, one realizes for oneself with direct knowledge here and now the liberations and deliverance of the mind, the deliverance by wisdom that are taintless. Sito Vimutti is the fruit of tranquility. Panya Vimutti is the fruit of insight. The commentaries assert that the appearance of these two terms as pair indicates that tranquility and insight must be combined, both at the level of fruit and path, Bala and Maga. Tranquility, samatha, here can be taken in the broad sense as required level of concentration. It need not refer to the deeper level of concentration resulting in higher psychic attainments. Two things pertain to supreme knowledge. What two? Serenity and insight. When serenity is developed, what benefit does it bring? The mind is developed. When the mind is developed, what benefit does it bring? Lust is abandoned. When insight is developed, what benefit does it bring? Wisdom is developed. When wisdom is developed, what benefit does it bring? Ignorance is abandoned. A mind defiled by lust is not liberated, and a wisdom defiled by ignorance is not developed. Thus, monks do the removal of lust. There is liberation of mind. Do the removal of ignorance. There is the liberation by wisdom. Liberation is complete with attainment of both Sito Vimutti and Panya Vimutti. It is possible only through the practice tranquility, and this practice can lead to the higher concentration of attainment, in which the defilements are suppressed. This is one kind of liberation, albeit a temporary one. In order to reach true liberation, however, a person practicing tranquility must also integrate insight meditation. The term Sito Vimutti can be used in contexts apart from the realization of path and fruit. Although in these contexts, the liberation of mind is not absolute. The decisive factor is therefore Panya Vimutti, which gradually eliminates ignorance and eradicates the defilements. True lasting liberation comes from Panya Vimutti. The term Anasawa, taintless, is used in conjunction with these two terms to emphasize perfect liberation. The term Sito Vimutti can be used in other contexts. It refers to the decisive liberation of Magga and Bala, path and fruit, from which a Sotapanna goes upwards, or stream entry upwards. Then it is paired with Panya Vimutti. Otherwise, it must be accompanied by a qualifying objective clearly indicating a stage of definite awakening. For example, unshakable, akupa, or asamaya, lasting. When found alone or accompanied by any other terms, then it does not refer to complete liberation. Because of the similarities of the term, the divisions of arihats into the liberation of wisdom, panya vimutta, one liberated both ways, gives the impressions that the former refers to someone who has solely attained liberation by wisdom. In fact, the attainments of Panya Vimutti necessarily include the attainment of Sito Vimutti in the sense that a person relies on a refined degree of concentration to attain liberation by wisdom. In this case, concentration does not need to be highlighted. Even someone who solely practices insight, Sukha Vipassana, depends on tranquility meditation to develop a required degree of concentration. In the case of one liberated in both ways, upato bhaga vimukta, liberation of the mind, sito vimutti, is emphasized. The reason for this emphasis is because the kind of sito vimutti refers here is exceptional, of the 8 vimokha, or the higher attainments of jhana. As mentioned above, the term vimutti is used in different contexts. The term sito vimutti, then referring to the levels of liberation that are not yet transcended, is most often used on its own. In this case, it suggests a liberation that is not absolute. Inferior kinds of liberation generally occur through the power of concentration. Later texts also use the term vimokha when referring to non-transcendent liberation. The original text reserved a unique definition of vimokha as explained in the chapters on awakening beings. Whichever term is used, vimutti, sito vimutti, or vimokha, it is usually accompanied by a qualifying adjective to clarify the context. For example, samayika vimutti, samayika sito vimutti, samayika vimokha, all meaning temporary liberation. Apana anya sito vimutti, boundless liberation, or santa sito vimutti, peaceful liberation. Replacing the qualifying objectives of inferior levels of liberation are objectives on the opposite meaning denotes a supreme form of liberation. For example, by replacing samayaka with asamaya, vimutti in general is a sense can be divided into two kinds, as the absolute and the non-absolute. When referring to the highest meaning, the word vimutti is preceded by one of the following qualifying adjectives to make it clear that the reference is to absolute, transcendent liberation, akupa, akupa vimutti, akupa sito vimutti, unshakable liberation, not degenerative liberation, or asamaya, asamaya vimutti, asamaya yika sito vimutti. Lasting liberation, timeless liberation, all terms refer to noble fruitation, ariya bala, especially the fruit of arihatship. And since the term sito vimutti on its own never refers to absolute liberation, the term akupa and asamaya yika are added to indicate the liberation of the mind that is absolute, not subject to decay, necessarily accompanied by liberation by wisdom. Another transcendent form of sito vimutti accessible to awakened beings in the signless liberation of the mind, anamita sito vimutti, which is also known as the fruitation attainment, bala samapati. This is reached when stream enterers, once returners, non-returners, and arihats wish to abide at ease and enter a state of concentration, experiencing the rajas, the flavor, the quality of their realization. The state of liberation is in abiding at ease in the present, Buddhadhamma sukha vihara, and a noble transcendent bliss, ariya lokutaraya sukha. It is called the signless liberation of mind, because it is the freedom of the mind, wherein the person takes no notice of signs and futures belonging to the conditioned phenomenon, to form, to feeling, to perception, to volitional formation, and to consciousness, and only focuses on nibbita, has nibbita as the object of awareness. Many lesser mundane levels of liberations are included in the term sito vimutti. When this term occurs on its own, alternatively, the term samayika sito vimutti, equivalent to all meanings temporary liberation, is used. The word ati vimutti, intent upon, absorbed in, is often used to describe the lesser levels of liberation, or else ati mutti is used as the synonyms for the above terms. Ati muti refers to being absorbed in an object to the extent that one is freed from disturbance and defilements for as long as one abides in that state. For example, one is free from hindrances when absorbed in jhana. The standard definition of temporary liberation equates to the liberation with the 8 mundane attainments and the 4 fine material and 4 immaterial jhanas. Concentration attainments of awakened person are confined to these 8. In order to specify with deliverance of the mind, he refers to the 8 attainments. The word santa, peaceful and refined, is occasionally added as santa sito vimutti. Temporary liberation can also have a very broad definition, referring to the absorption in any object of faith, inspiration, or delight. This kind of liberation accompanies a mind that is intensely focused on an object. This focus generates strength, courage, and perseverance. It is incipient stage in the natural process, ita pachayata or pachisammupata, that leads on to joy, tranquility, and concentration. It is called liberation because it escapes from conflicting and bothersome mental qualities, mental adversaries such as doubt, discouragement, mental sluggishness, and fear. These mental qualities are suppressed as long as the conditions supporting liberation are maintained. As long as the mental strength generated by inspiration remains. The text even classified the inspiration to live in a forest, or the joys of arising when listening to a dhammata, as the kind of liberation of mind. Aspects of this kind of liberation, however, can also give rise to unwholesome mental states. There are names for specific kinds of temporary liberation. Samayika sito vimutti, depending on the object on which the mind is focused. The temporary liberation of mind is most often mentioned and encouraged. It's called boundless liberation. Apanyamana sito vimutti and apamana sito vimutti. Here one develops the concentration by radiating qualities of loving kindness, of metta, compassion, karuna, appreciative joys, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha, in all directions with the mind that is unbounded and immeasurable. Until the mind is absorbed in these wholesome qualities in inner jhana, the mind is freed from the 5 hindrances and from the 5 unwholesome qualities that are antagonistic, that are against the 4 qualities listed above. Ill will, liberation of compassion, karuna sito vimutti, free from hostility, the liberation of appetitive joy, mudita sito vimutti, and are free from jealousy. The liberation of equanimity, upekkha sito vimutti, is free from lust. Other kinds of temporary liberation of mind which occurs in the Tipitaka only rarely include sunanta sito vimutti, liberation of mind stemming from insight that our conditioned phenomenon are empty of self and empty of anything related to self. Atthaniya. Akinchana sito vimutti, the immaterial jhana directed by the sphere of nothingness, and the mahagata sito vimutti. While in jhana, radiating the mind engaged with kasinya meditation, object over however large an area or domain as one chooses. Drawn upon and above material, it is fair to say that any devotion to an idea or an object of faith, for example, a supreme deity, is a kind of absorption and can be included in the broad definition of sito vimutti. Some people claim that abiding in jhana and nibbita, or claim that extinction of perception and feeling, sanya vetarika nirota, and nirota samapati, the highest concentration of attainments in nibbita. In fact, these concentration attainments are used as instrument to attain arihatship. They prepare the mind and make it suitable for the awakened These attainments, along with other materials, immaterial properties, are conditioned phenomenon, or which reflected upon by Dhamma practitioners with insight and wisdom to give rise to true knowledge. Vijja. Arihats use these concentration attainments for rest and for experience happiness. These attainments are thus called abiding at ease in the present, divine abidings, and gradually ascending abidings. These states, however, are not nibbida. There are means by which nibbida can be realized, and they are easeful abidings for those who have already realized nibbida. So basically, they're just tools or steps to get there, to nibbida. Indeed, the realization of nibbida facilitates the attainments of these concentration states and allows a person to benefit greatly from them. For example, a person who has attained the 8 jhanas will have the necessary concentration and wisdom to reach the attainment of cessation, nirodha samapatti, which they realize is the state of a non-returner or an arihat. A person who has not yet realized arihatship or has become an arihanta still has the degree of attachment to fine material and immaterial existence. They may still be fascinated or attached to concentration of attainments. Although jhanas are excellent, Buddhism considers attachment to jhanas as weakness. Indeed, such attachments can be an obstacle for realizing nibbida. Gautama Buddha said that if a monk attains the highest immaterial jhana, but indulges in the feelings of the state, he will not be able to realize nibbida because there is still clinging to such a refined state. Gautama Buddha called superior clinging. Arihats must use of jhana to dwell at ease, but without any attachment. Proof that jhana and all the way up to the attainment of cessation are not nibbida. In fact, the arihats, who are those liberated by wisdom, panya vimutta, have not attained the immaterial jhanas and are unable to enter the attainment of cessation. From the Tipitaka, we can deduce that at the time of the Buddha, there were more panya vimutta than upagaga vimutta. For example, at large gatherings of monks, the Gautama Buddha told Venerable Sariputra, of these 500 bhikkhus, Sariputra, 60 bhikkhus are triple knowledge barriers, te vijja. 60 bhikkhus are barriers of 6 direct knowledge, chala, abhinya. 60 bhikkhus are liberated in both ways, while the rest, 320, are liberated by wisdom. Liberation by wisdom is decisive and equivalent to attaining nibbida. This kind of liberation liberation of mind, which may have achieved long before repeatedly excess in the past. Or else it arises simultaneous with panya vimutti into unshakable liberation of mind, since the taints have now been eliminated. Awakened persons derive the maximum benefit from sito vimutti without harming themselves or others. They do not indulge in these attainments, nor do they not use fruit of concentration. The mundane psychic powers in a misguided way for self-gratification. Here, liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom exist as a pair, as is frequently mentioned in the earlier text. The deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Gautama Buddha said that this is unshakable liberation of mind. Is the essence and goal of Buddhism. When he is diligent, he attains permanent liberation. And it is impossible for that bhikkhu to fall away from the permanent liberation. So this holy life, Brahman, does not give gain, honor, and fame for its benefit, or its attainment of virtue for its benefit, or the attainment of concentration for its benefit, or knowledge and vision for its benefit. But it is unshakable deliverance of mind that it is goal of this holy life, its heartwood and its end. There are 3 factors leading to the decline of temporary liberation of mind. First, the defilements, the kilesas, which have not yet been completely eliminated. They may have been suppressed or subdued, but they have lie in wait and are aroused when the positive conditions have faith weakened. Second are the supportive conditions like faith, enthusiasm, contentment, and determination. When these conditions fade or weaken, liberation of mind also declines. These supportive conditions may even invade for good reasons. A person may at one time have strong faith in something and be greatly devoted, but later realize that the faith is not grounded in wisdom and object of faith is unworthy of such development. Third are environmental factors, which include a person's health. The external conditions like poverty or famine. In spiritual practice, these three factors are linked. For example, due to some difficulty, a person who loses heart, confusion, irritation, and discouragement will arise, and liberation of mind will vanish. There are some interesting stories from the Tipitaka of how liberation of mind can be effected. Venerable Gokika was diligent, resolute, and he reached temporary liberation of mind, the mundane contemplative attainments. But due to the torment of chronic illness, he fell away from this liberation of mind. A second and third time, he reached temporary liberation of mind and fell away again from it. This happened 6 times. When he reached temporary liberation of mind the 7th time, he thought that he would surely fall away from it before. He considered that it would be better to die while he was in the state of liberation than die after falling away from it. He thus used a knife to kill himself. But as he was lying on his bed in pain, he established mindfulness and reflected on feelings that are arising. While meditating in this way, he achieved arihatship before attaining final nibbita. Another passage describes the ascetics and Brahmins who went into the forest, living on fruits and berries, thinking that if they were to get caught up in sensuality, they would become intoxicated and fall under the spell of marahos. When food was sacred or scarce, they had become thin and weak. Their determination and enthusiasm lacking, and they returned to the wider world to enjoy sense pleasures. The commentaries sorted the many definition of muti into 5 groups, following the same mode that they used for sorting the definition of cessation. The 5 groups act as useful summary as they contain the essence of all definitions presented so far. Vikampana vimuti, liberation through the suppression of defilements, the suspension of 5 hindrances to the power of concentration. This refers to the 8 attainments of sammapati, the 4 fine materials and the 4 immaterial jhanas, and sometimes include access concentration, upachara samadhi. Dandaka vimuti, liberation by ways of specific quality to be freed from unwholesome qualities by substitution of opposite qualities. Technically speaking, it is the freedom from wrong views and attachment through the application of insight or knowledge. For example, focusing on impermanent frees one from the belief in permanence. It can also be used, however, to reference to general matters of virtue and ethics. For example, a devotion to generosity frees one from stinginess and greed. A commitment to loving kindness frees one from ill will and negativity. And the dedication to compassion and nonviolence free one from violence and cruelty. The first 2 kinds of liberation covers the meanings of temporary liberation, samayika sito vimuti, and are mundane. Samcheta vimuti, the cutting off of the defilements, liberation through final knowledge, vimuti as the path, magga. Pati pasati vimuti, the utter removal of stealing of defilements, vimuti as the fruit of pala. Nitsarana vimuti, the state of deliverance, complete liberation, leading to supreme joy and unhindered engagement with the world. Vimutti as nibbita. These final three kinds of liberation are defined as permanent liberation. Asamaya ikasito vimutti are transcendent. Essentially, the five kinds of liberation are equivalent to samatha, vipassana, magga, phala, and nibbita, respectively.